Okay, I hope you can hear me. I don't know. Right now, I don't have anybody here to tell me if they can hear me, but I checked my microphone, I reset everything, so I'll just start reading. And if you can't hear me, I hope you say something. All right, this is chapter 2 of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Miriam, can you hear me? You're saying hi, but can you hear me? And if this is your first time watching with us, we're not just reading chapter 2, we are talking about the vocabulary, interesting vocabulary that we find as we go. So I will stop and explain interesting words to you, or interesting vocabulary or phrases that maybe you don't understand. And we're doing this live, so if you're watching this live, then I definitely encourage you to ask questions about words or phrases that we encounter as we go. Don't think that you're interrupting me. I want you to ask questions as we go. All right, well, we had a little problem. I tried doing this 5 minutes earlier, but there was no audio, so we fixed that. All right, well, let's get started now with chapter 2 of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Amir is here. Amir says hello. Hi, Amir. Okay, about halfway between West Egg and New York, the motor road hastily joins the railroad and runs beside it for a quarter of a mile. The word hasty is similar to the word quick. So when something is done hastily, it's done very quickly. But the difference between something being very quick and something being hasty is when you do something in a hasty way, the idea is you do not care about the quality. You only care about the time. So if you're in school and you did not, and you're supposed to finish a project for tomorrow and you didn't even start it, you spend all night just putting something together, you don't care about the result. You just have to make something. And it's usually not good when you do something hastily. You do it quickly because you care about the time, not the result. If you eat dinner hastily, you just shove the food in your mouth very quickly and you don't enjoy it and you don't care about enjoying it. It's just you don't have a lot of time. So something that's hastily done is something done quickly and the result usually isn't good. Now if you think about the time that this book was written in the 1920s, cars were just becoming popular. And so they just started making roads probably to accommodate all of these cars. Maybe they didn't always think about, oh, is this really the best place to put a street? Is this the best place to put a road? And they just did it because they needed a road for the cars. So these are hastily built roads. A motor road hastily joins the railroad. So they built the road and they didn't really think about the best way to connect where the railroad tracks were and the road. So it's probably not a very good intersection. Miriam says a rash act. Yes, a rash act is something that you do without thinking. Rash and hasty are very similar words, actually. Well, let's see. A rashly built road. Okay, the difference, though, between rash and hasty is that when you do something rashly, you do it without thinking. You do it quickly, probably, and you do it without thinking. But if you're doing something hastily, maybe you're thinking about the process. It's just you don't really care about the result. It's just that time is more important than the result. But they are pretty similar. So about halfway between West Egg and New York, the motor road hastily joins the railroad and runs beside it for a quarter of a mile, so as to shrink away from a certain desolate area of land. Desolate means that there's nothing there. There's no life. There are no animals, no trees, no plants, no people. It's just like a desert. This is a valley of ashes. A fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat, into the ridges and hills and grotesque gardens, where ashes take the form of houses, chimneys, and rising smoke, and finally, with a transcendent effort of men who move dimly and already crumbling through the powdery air. Ashes, in case you don't know what ashes are, let's take a look at a picture of ashes. It's a pretty common word, but then again, you never know. Ashes is what is left when something is burnt. So here are some ashes. Now, if you live in a warmer climate, with not a lot of people, you probably don't have to worry about this. But if you live in a cold place, especially if there are a lot of people, imagine everybody in the winter, especially in the 1920s before gas was very popular, they would have to burn a lot of wood or a lot of coal to keep warm. And so all of that smoke goes up from the chimneys, and then the ashes fall from the air. So a lot of things would be covered in black. I remember reading something about Pittsburgh, which is a very industrial city in the United States, or was a very industrial city, about 120 years ago. And that's when women used to wear white gloves all the time. And they would always have to take several pairs of gloves with them because their gloves would turn black as they were walking. So they would have to change their gloves because of the ashes falling. And I think that's what he's referring to here. So there's an area of land where nothing grows, and so many ashes have fallen into that area that it's just kind of black, and there are no trees or bushes or anything, and definitely no people live there. Occasionally, a line of gray cars crawling along an invisible track gives out a ghastly creak and comes to rest. And immediately the ash-gray men swarm up with leaden spades and stir up the impenetrable cloud, which screams to their obscure operations from your sight. I think actually what they're doing is they're talking about trains, because trains now run on fuel like gas or electricity, but in the past they would run on steam, and the way that they would make the steam is they would put the coal into the trains, into a big furnace, and then there would be smoke coming out. So wherever you had a train going by, probably there would be a lot of ashes. And it says, occasionally a line of gray cars crawls along the invisible track and gives out a ghastly creak. Creak is ee. If you've ever been around a train, you know that maybe the brakes on the train, when the train is slowing down, it makes a very loud creak. Ee. And immediately the ash-gray men swarm up with leaden spades. Spades are shovels. So, these are the men who, to power the train, they have to shovel the coal and put it in the fire, and that creates the steam, which creates the energy, which creates the ashes. But these men are gray. They're covered in ash because all they do all day is shovel coal. And immediately the ash-gray men swarm up with leaden spades and stir up an impenetrable cloud, which screens their obscure operations from your sight. So they dig through the ashes, which creates a cloud, and then you can't really see what they're doing. You just know that they're there. But above the gray land and the spasms of bleak dust, which drift endlessly over it, you perceive, after a moment, the eyes of Dr. T. J. Eckelberg. The eyes of Dr. T. J. Eckelberg are blue and gigantic. Their retinas are 1 yard high. They look out of no face but They look out of no face, but instead from a pair of enormous yellow spectacles which pass over a non-existent nose. So this man, he wears glasses. Spectacles are glasses. And he's got big eyes, but no nose. Evidently, some wild wag of an occultist set them there to fatten his practice in the borough of Queens. I think maybe they're talking about a billboard, so an advertisement. So this is not a person, but a big sign with his face. And then sank down himself into the eternal blindness, or forgot them and moved away. But his eyes, dimmed a little by many paintless days under the sun and rain, brood over the solemn dumping ground. So there's an old advertisement, a really big advertisement for Dr. Eckelberg, and you can tell it's old because the paint has faded. You know, when it was new, there were very strong colors, but after many days or many months or years in the sun and weather, the colors are not very strong anymore. That means they've faded. And so he's just describing this weird picture of piles of ash in this old advertisement of Dr. Eckelberg. The Valley of Ashes is bounded on one side by a small foul river. Foul, it means disgusting or horrible. So he's really describing a very ugly place. The land is all black and gray with ashes, and there's a train yard there. And there's also a river, but the river is foul. It's disgusting. It's dirty. It's brown. It's black. The Valley of Ashes is bounded on one side by a small, foul river. And when the drawbridge is up and lets the barges through, let me show you what a drawbridge is. We've talked about the word draw before, meaning not drawing like making a picture, but draw meaning like take, like extract. And then the example that I've shown you before is like this. This is a word, I'm just going to spend a minute talking about this word because it's used quite a bit in many different ways. And it's a word that people don't seem to know very much. So you probably recognize this. This is called a water well. And when you take water, when you take the water from the well, we call that drawing water from the well. So drawing doesn't mean make a pretty picture. It does sometimes, or an ugly picture. But it also means to take, like to extract. So that's another way that draw is used, and it's pretty common, even though a lot of people don't know about it. Now let me show you what a drawbridge is. And I'm from Chicago, and Chicago has many of these types of bridges. It's kind of famous from these bridges. These are bridges that go up like this, so that a ship can pass through. That's called a drawbridge. And the reason it's called a drawbridge is because, well, a long time ago, you would make the bridge go up like this. You would take the bridge up. So that's, draw sometimes means like take or extract, and that's why it's called a drawbridge. The Valley of Ashes is bounded on one side by a small foul river, and when the drawbridge is up to let the barges through, the passengers on waiting trains can stare at the dismal scene for as long as half an hour. There's always a halt there of at least a minute, and it was because of this that I first met Tom Buchanan's mistress. Okay, so he's describing this horrible place covered in black and gray ashes, with a dirty, disgusting river, probably brown, black water, and a train yard. It's a really horrible kind of place. And there's a drawbridge there. So when the ships stop, it takes maybe almost half an hour for them to make the bridge go up, and then the ship starts again and moves past the bridge. So sometimes you have to, if you're on the road wanting to cross the river, you're going to have to wait maybe 30 minutes before you can cross the river. And he says it was here that he met Tom Buchanan's mistress. A mistress is like the girlfriend of a married man. So we already saw in chapter 1 that Tom Buchanan, who is married, has a girlfriend in New York, and that is his mistress. So it was while, what is this guy's name? I think his name is Nick. It's while Nick was waiting for the drawbridge, he met Tom Buchanan's mistress. The fact that he had one was insisted upon wherever he was known. So actually, if you mention his name in town, oh, Tom Buchanan, you know he has a mistress. Everybody talks about it. His acquaintances resented the fact that he turned up in popular restaurants with her hand, leaving her at a table, sauntered about, chatting with whomsoever he knew. So this is pretty shocking. He's a married man, and he has a girlfriend, and he's not ashamed of it. He takes her out. Usually, if men would do that in the past, they would hide it, and they would make it very secret. But everybody is shocked, and they don't like it that he takes her everywhere. They go to restaurants. He just walks up to people casually that he knows with his mistress and talks to him as if she's his wife. And people don't like that. Though I was curious to see her, I had no desire to meet her, but I did. I went up to New York with Tom on the train one afternoon, and when we stopped by the ash heaps, he jumped to his feet, taking hold of my elbow, literally forced me from the car. "We're getting off," he insisted. "I want you to meet my girl." I think he had tanked up a good deal at luncheon, and his determination to have my company bordered on violence. I think what he means by tanked up is he drank a lot of alcohol. So I think he drank a lot of alcohol during our lunch, and the way that he said, "Come on, let's go meet my girlfriend," it was almost violent the way that he did it. The supercilious assumption was that on Sunday afternoon I had nothing better to do. Okay, they use that word supercilious in chapter 1, but I don't remember what it means. I remember looking it up, but I don't remember what it means. Let's see. Supercilious. Behaving or looking as though one thinks one is superior to others. So Nick didn't like the way that Tom said, "Come on, we're going to meet my girlfriend," as if he didn't consult Nick. Like, "Do you want to do this?" He just took charge like he's superior, like he's better, and it doesn't matter what Nick wants. It only matters what Tom wants. And that's why he's using the word supercilious. But that's not a common word. So I wouldn't go around using it unless you want to confuse people. Uh-oh, I'm blurry. Okay. Well, you know what? I'm sorry, but I have to take like a 5-minute, not a 5-minute break, a 1-minute break. I'll be right back. I just have to run to the bathroom. Okay. Thank you for waiting. All right. So he says, I think he tanked up a good deal at luncheon, so I think he got really drunk during lunch. And his determination to have my company bordered on violence. The supercilious assumption was that on Sunday afternoon I had nothing better to do. So he's angry. Well, not angry, but he feels a little bit insulted that he wasn't asked, do you want to meet my girlfriend? He just said, come on, let's go meet my girl. I followed him over a low whitewashed railroad fence, and we walked back 100 yards along the road under Dr. Eckelberg's persistent stare. The only building in sight was a small block of yellow brick sitting on the edge of the wasteland, a sort of compact main street ministering to it and contiguous to absolutely nothing. Let's see. Let's read that again. The only building in sight was a small block of yellow brick sitting on the edge of a small wasteland. So you have to imagine this wasteland. That's like land that you can't use, land that's destroyed. And this land is just black ashes. But there's one building, a building of yellow brick. And that's the main street of this town. It's not really a town. And contiguous to absolutely nothing. So there's nothing else around it. It's just this yellow brick building in the middle of a horrible place. One of the 3 shops it contained was for rent, and another was an all-night restaurant approached by a trail of ashes. The third was a garage. Repairs. George B. Wilson. Cars bought and sold. I followed Tim inside. The interior was unprosperous and bare. The only car visible was a dust-covered wreck from a Ford which crouched in a dim corner. Miriam says Tom is Daisy's husband. That's right. That's right. Tom is Daisy's husband, and Daisy is Nick's cousin, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Nick is this person who's annoyed. So Tom is taking Nick, Daisy's cousin, to meet his mistress. The interior was unprosperous and bare. The only car visible was a dust-covered wreck from a Ford, which crouched in a dim corner. It had occurred to me that this shadow of a garage must be a blind, and that the sumptuous and romantic apartments were concealed overhead, when the proprietor himself appeared in the door of an office, wiping his hands on a piece of waste. He was a blond, spiritless man, anemic, and faintly handsome. When he saw us, a damp gleam of hope sprang into his light blue eyes. "Hello, Wilson, old man," said Tom, slapping him jovially on the shoulder. "How's business?" "I can't complain," answered Wilson unconvincingly. "When are you going to sell me that car?" "Next week." "I got my man working on it now. Works pretty slow, don't he?" "No, he doesn't," said Tom coldly. "And if you feel that way about it, maybe I'd better sell it somewhere else, after all." "I don't mean that," explained Wilson quickly. "I just meant—" His voice faded off, and Tom glanced impatiently around the garage. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs, and in a moment the thickish figure of a woman blocked out the light from the office door. She was in the middle 30s and faintly stout. Stout means kind of fat. So she was a little fat, a little chubby. But she carried her surplus flesh sensuously, as some women can. So she was fat, but she was kind of sexy. To be sensuous means to be very sexy. So and surplus means extra, unnecessary. So she carried her unnecessary flesh, that's meat. She carried her unnecessary meat sensuously. She was kind of fat, but in a sexy way. Her face, above a spotted dress of dark blue crepe de chine, contained no facet or gleam of beauty. But there was an immediately perceptible vitality about her, as if the nerves of her body were continually smoldering. She smiled slowly, and walking through her husband, as if he were a ghost, shook hands with Tom. So she's coming down the stairs and she sees Tom, and she just walks right past her husband as if he doesn't exist, as if he's not there. And it seems like she's very happy to see Tom. Looking him flush in the eye, and then she wet her lips, so she went, "That's wetting your lips," and without turning around, spoke to her husband in a soft, coarse voice. "Get some chairs, why don't you, so somebody can sit down." "Oh, sure," agreed Wilson hurriedly, and went toward the little office, mingling immediately with the cement color of the walls. A white ashen dust veiled his dark suit, and his pale hair as it veiled everything in the vicinity, except his wife, who moved close to Tom. So he's wearing kind of a gray work suit, and he sort of blends with the ashen walls, with the gray walls, and even his hair is kind of gray because of all the dirt around. "I want to see you," said Tom intently. "Get on the next train." "All right. I'll meet you by the newsstand on the lower level." She nodded and moved away. Wait a minute, is this his girlfriend or the husband of the mechanic? Well, let's see. Did I just assume that was her husband? I'm looking for when she goes down the stairs. Okay, so here's the woman in the middle 30s. Her face, she's pretty but a little bit fat. Continually, she smiled. Yeah, that is her husband. But it sounds like that's his girlfriend, too. Oh, this is getting weird. This is getting a little weird. "I'll meet you by the newsstand on the lower level." She nodded and moved away from him just as George Wilson emerged with 2 chairs from his office door. We waited for her down the road and out of sight. It was a few days before the 4th of July, and a gray, scrawny Italian child was setting torpedoes in a row along the railroad track. So there's a little boy or a little girl, I don't know. And scrawny means skinny, but also very weak looking. So if something is scrawny, maybe it doesn't get enough food. So a scrawny animal, a scrawny child. This would be a child who maybe doesn't eat too much and is also skinny, so they look weak. And because it's around the 4th of July, this child is at the train tracks setting off fireworks. "Terrible place, isn't it?" said Tom, exchanging a frown with Dr. Eckelberg. "Awful. It does her good to get away. Doesn't her husband object? So that is his mistress, and she's married, and her husband knows about it. This is pretty weird especially, maybe it's not so weird these days, but especially in the 1920s, that would be extremely weird. Wilson? He thinks she goes to see her sister in New York. He's so dumb, he doesn't even know he's alive. Oh, so the husband doesn't know. So Tom Buchanan and his girl and I went up together to New York, or not quite together, for Mrs. Wilson sat discreetly in another car. Tom deferred that much to the sensibilities of those East Eggers who might be on the train. So, I'm a little bit confused because it said that he seems so unashamed of having a mistress that he would go to restaurants with her and talk to his friends with her right next to him as if he didn't care that they knew. But maybe he only does that in New York, but he doesn't do that in this small town, which makes sense. I was a little bit surprised that he would be doing that in the small town. She had changed her dress to a brown figured muslin, which stretched out over her rather wide hips as Tom helped her to the platform in New York. At the newsstand, she bought a copy of Town Tattle. Tattle is like telling secrets. So if you're tattling, you're telling people secrets you're not supposed to. So this must be like a gossip magazine, the Town Tattle, telling everybody's secrets in the town. And a moving picture magazine, and in the station drugstore, some cold cream and a small flask of perfume. Upstairs, in the solemn echoing drive, she let four taxi cabs drive away before she selected a new one, lavender-colored, with gray upholstery. And in this, we slid out from the mass of the station into the glowing sunshine, but immediately she turned sharply from the window and, leaning forward, tapped the front glass. "I want to get one of those dogs," she said earnestly. "I want to get one for the apartment. They're nice to have, a dog." We backed up to a gray old man who bore an absurd resemblance to John D. Rockefeller, and in a basket swung from his neck cowered a dozen very recent puppies of an indeterminate breed. If you say that something is indeterminate, that means I don't know what it is. I don't know exactly what it is. And a breed of dog is a type of dog. So, you have Labradors and Golden Retrievers and Beagles, German Shepherds. These are all types of dogs. So when you say indeterminate breed, it's like, I don't know. Is that a German Shepherd? Is that a Beagle? Is that a Poodle? What kind are they? So she's asking, what is the breed? What do you call this type of dog? Asked Mrs. Wilson eagerly as she came to the taxi window. All kinds. What kind do you want, lady? I'd like to get one of those police dogs. I don't suppose you got that kind. The man peered doubtfully in his basket and plunged his hand and drew one up. Wriggling. Wriggling is this movement. So he picked up the puppy, and the puppy is wriggling by the back of the neck. That's no police dog, said Tom. No, it's not exactly a police dog, said the man with disappointment in his voice. It's more of an Airedale. He passed his hand over the brown wash rag of a back. Look at that coat. Some coat. That's a dog that'll never bother you with catching cold. I think it's cute, said Mrs. Wilson enthusiastically. How much is it? That dog? He looked at it admiringly. That dog will cost you $10. Well, wow, that sounds like a lot of money for a puppy, especially a street puppy back then. The Airedale undoubtedly was an Airedale concerned in its This is a weird sentence. The Airedale. Undoubtedly there was an Airedale concerned in it somewhere, though its feet were startlingly white. So it wasn't, a lot of times people will pay an enormous amount of money for a pure dog. So Airedale is a type of dog. Let's see what an Airedale looks like. I'm not even sure. I think I know, but Airedale. Oh, okay. Yeah, I recognize this type of dog. So this is an Airedale. Actually, I think those dogs are very mean. They could be a police dog. So, the Airedale. So the man selling these animals, they're mixed. They're definitely not pure. It's just some old man in the street selling these puppies. But he's calling it an Airedale, and the author is saying the Airedale. Undoubtedly, there was an Airedale concerned in it somewhere. So, yeah, okay, maybe there was like, it's maybe 20% Airedale. Maybe you could see some of those features, but obviously it's not 100% Airedale. You would never pay $10 for a dog like that in 1920. Though its feet were startlingly white, changed hands and settled down into Mrs. Wilson's lap, where she fondled the weatherproof coat with rapture. Fondling is, maybe she's touching and doing this to the dog. "Is it a boy or a girl?" she asked delicately. "That dog? That dog's a boy." "It's a bitch," said Tom decisively. "Here's your money. Go and buy 10 more dogs with it." So, first of all, you've seen that word bitch before as a bad word. Really, it just means female dog. That's what it means in its pure form, not in its insult form. So Tom says it's a girl, and he says, "Here's your money. Go and buy 10 more dogs." He knows $10 is way too much to pay for this dog. But he doesn't care. He doesn't care about money. He has a lot of money. So he doesn't bargain. He just is here, take it, and go buy 10 more. Which is how he's saying, I know you. I did a short video recently about the term rip-off. And rip-off is when someone charges you a lot of money and they don't give you anything for it. That's a rip-off. And so Tom knows that this old man ripped him off. He charged $10 for something that is not even close to $10 in value. But he doesn't care. He says, "Here, now go buy 10 more with it." Miriam is saying scrawny and scraggy. No, I don't think that those are synonyms. Maybe a scrawny thing could be scraggy. Let me check. I just want to check the definition of scraggy, which isn't really a very common word, but to me that means like maybe dirty or not in good condition, but let me just make sure about that. Rugged, rough textured. Oh, well actually it says rugged or rough textured in an attractive way. So a scraggy, which is not something actually... Wait, let's see. What happens? Scraggy, like if you're talking about the shore, like where the water meets the land, and there are a lot of rocks, it's not a nice beach, but a lot of rocks or points that go up and down, you probably would call that scraggy. Let's see, scraggy face. What kind of... No, unfortunately, it's the name of a cartoon character. So all you get are pictures of a stupid cartoon. Okay. But the definition of scraggy could mean like attractive in a masculine way. Like maybe a face with a lot of different features to it. Up and down, little ins and outs. Which could maybe look okay on a man, so it could be like attractive in a masculine way. But scrawny means skinny and weak looking. Insufficient. So scraggy, if you're talking about a face, could be something nice. But scrawny, if you're describing someone as scrawny, and that could be a man or a woman, a boy or a girl, that would mean like weak, doesn't look strong. We drove over to Fifth Avenue, so warm and soft, almost pastoral, on the summer Sunday afternoon, and I wouldn't have been surprised to see a great flock of white sheep turn the corner. So they're in the middle of the city, but it's such a nice, sunny, quiet day that it seems like they're out on a farm. Hold on, I said. I have to leave you here. No, you don't, interposed Tom quickly. Myrtle'll be hurt if you don't come up to the apartment, won't you, Myrtle? Oh, come on, she urged. I'll telephone my sister Catherine. She's said to be very beautiful by people who ought to know. Well, I'd like to, but... We went on, cutting back again over the park toward the West Hundreds. At 158th Street, the cab stopped at one slice in a long white cake of apartment houses, throwing a regal homecoming glance around the neighborhood. Mrs. Wilson gathered up her dog and her other purchases and went haughtily in. Haughty is like thinking that you're better than other people. So she has her dog and her rich boyfriend, her sugar daddy, and she goes into the apartment building like she's the queen. I'm going to have the McKees come up, she announced, as we rose in the elevator. And of course I've got to call up my sister, too. The apartment was on the top floor. A small living room, a small dining room, a small bedroom, and a bath. The living room was crowded to the doors with a set of tapestried furniture entirely too large for it, so that to move about was to stumble continually over the scenes of ladies swinging in the gardens of Versailles. The only picture was an over-enlarged photograph, apparently a hen sitting on a blurred rock. So the apartment's very small, but, you know, she's a mistress, and she wants to get everything she can from this. So she made her boyfriend buy her all of this big, expensive furniture. It's too big for the apartment. And it sounds kind of ugly, too. So it's really difficult to walk around the living room because the furniture is very big, too big for the apartment. Looked at from a distance, however, the hen resolved itself into a bonnet. And the countenance, remember, countenance is your facial expression. How does your face look? Does it look happy? Does it look sad? What is your countenance? Or, let's see. The countenance of a stout old lady beamed down into the room. Several old copies of the Town Tattle lay on the table together with a copy of Simon Called Peter, and some of the small scandal magazines of Broadway. Mrs. Wilson was first concerned with the dog. A reluctant elevator boy went for a box full of straw and some milk, to which he added, on his own initiative, a tin of large, hard dog biscuits. Let's see. Recuerdo says, I have in my apartment a lot of stuff. I like to call it tacky corners. So you put a lot of little... Tacky means in bad taste. Things that are... Wait. Sometimes people like to collect things that are ugly because they like ugly things or ridiculous things. Let's see. Tacky collection. So, for example, these mugs. Uh-oh, that's not what I wanted. These are not exactly beautiful. You know, when people go and they visit a place, they like to buy a little souvenir. And usually these souvenirs have ridiculous colors or ridiculous pictures. They're not beautiful, but they're kind of fun to collect. And you call these tacky. These are tacky, a tacky collection of mugs. So Recuerdos has a collection of things in his house, his or her house, where he keeps tacky collections. So look at this. Okay, everybody likes Paris. It's a nice city. But, you know, to buy a little statue of the Eiffel Tower, of course you probably do that if you visit Paris. but is kind of tacky too. And this person has taken it very far. This is their tacky corner. All right, so Mrs. Wilson sent the elevator boy to go and buy some milk and a little bed for the dog. And the boy even bought some biscuits, some dog biscuits for the dog, one of which decomposed apathetically. In the saucer of milk all afternoon. Meanwhile, Tom brought out a bottle of whiskey from a locked bureau door. I've been drunk just twice in my life, and the second time was that afternoon, so everything that happened has a dim, hazy cover over it, although until after 8 o'clock the apartment was full of cheerful sun. Sitting on Tom's lap, Mrs. Wilson called up several people on the telephone, and there were no cigarettes, and I went out to buy some at the drugstore on the corner. When I came back, they had disappeared, so I sat down discreetly in the living room and read a chapter of Simon called Peter. Either it was terrible stuff, or the whiskey distorted things, because it didn't make any sense to me. Just as Tom and Myrtle, after the first drink, Mrs. Wilson and I called each other by our first names, reappeared. Company commenced to arrive at the apartment door. The sister Catherine was a slender means skinny. So think about that. We saw the word scrawny, which also means skinny, but that word means like weak, like not eating enough food, like maybe even sick looking. So that's a bad way of saying skinny. But this word slender is a nice way of saying skinny. So she looks healthy and skinny. So the sister Catherine was a slender, worldly girl of about 30, with a solid sticky bob of red hair. When you describe someone as worldly, that means that they've had many different experiences, done a lot of things. It could imply that she's, maybe she's had a lot of experience with men. That could be one way. It could also mean she's traveled to many different countries, or she's been in many different situations. When someone is worldly, they've had many different types of experiences. Miriam says slender is like slim. Yeah, I guess slim, I think, is kind of a neutral word. It means skinny. But when you say slender, I think that when you do that, you're also kind of saying attractive. So skinny in an attractive way. And slim just means skinny, but slender means kind of skinny and also maybe attractive, beautiful. And scrawny means skinny and sick looking. Or weak looking. And a complexion of powdered milky white. Her eyebrows had been plucked and then drawn on again at a more rakish angle. But the efforts of nature toward the restoration of the old alignment gave a blurred air on her face. When she moved about, there was an incessant clicking of innumerable pottery bracelets jingled up and down on her arms. She came in with such a proprietary haste. We've got that word haste again. So she came in very quickly, not worried about... Remember, when you do something in a hasty way, that means you do it quickly and you don't care about the quality. So entering the room with haste means she didn't look very graceful, or she didn't enter the room in a beautiful, graceful way. She just came in very quickly without caring about the way that she looked when she did it. She came in with such a proprietary haste and looked around so possessively at the furniture that I wondered if she lived there. So she came in a way that looked like she came in quickly without worrying about what people thought of her. And proprietary, that comes from the same word as property. So proprietary means you own it. So she walked in quickly, like she owned it. And she looked at the furniture and the things in the room as if they belonged to her. And that made Nick think, is this her apartment? But when I asked her, she laughed immoderately and repeated my question aloud and told me she lived with a girlfriend at a hotel. Mr. McKee was a pale, feminine man with a flat below. He had just shaved, for there was a white spot of lather on his cheekbone. Lather, let's look at that word lather for a minute. Lather is when you take soap or something like soap and you add water and then you get lather. This is lather. So he obviously had just been shaving. I need to shave today. I haven't shaved in a long time. But he had just shaved, and the reason that Nick knew that he shaved was because there was a little spot of white lather still on his face. He had just shaved, for there was a white spot of lather on his cheekbone. And he was most respectful in greeting everyone in the room. He informed me that he was in the artistic game, and I gathered later that he was a photographer, and had made dim enlargement of Mrs. Wilson's mother, which hovered like an ectoplasm on the wall. His wife was shrill. That means his wife has a very high-pitched voice. When you hear his wife, you'd think, oh, like nails on a chalkboard. So his wife she has a very strong voice that makes you go like this. Oh. His wife was shrill, languid, handsome, and horrible. She told me with pride that her husband had photographed her 127 times since they had been married. Mrs. Wilson had changed her costume. I lost my place. Okay, Mrs. Wilson had changed her costume some time before and was now attired in an elaborate afternoon dress of cream-colored chiffon, which gave out a continual rustle. Rustle is the sound of, like this, the sound of cloth moving against other cloth. This is rustling. So Mrs. Wilson, the mistress, changed her dress, and now it had a lot of pieces on it. So when she moved, you heard a lot of this. Miriam says leaves rustling. Yes, that also that's the sound of leaves. If the wind is blowing the trees, you can hear the leaves rustling. That's the sound of trees moving up against each other. With the influence of the dress, her personality had also undergone a change. The intense vitality that had been so remarkable in the garage was converted into an impressive hauteur. So suddenly, now that she's wearing this fancy dress, before in the garage, before they left for New York, she was very lively and energetic. And now she's wearing this fancy dress and she's acting very fancy. Her laughter, her gestures, the way she moves, her assertions became more violently affected moment by moment. When something is affected, A-F-F-E-C-T-E-D, not E, but A, affected, it means like fake. So she changed her dress. Before, she seemed more natural in the garage with her husband. And now she changed her dress. She's wearing her fancy dress. She's in her fancy New York apartment. And suddenly, the words that she uses, the way that she moves, are affected. They seem fake. They don't seem real anymore. They seem like she's trying. Maybe that would be a good way of explaining it. As she expanded, the room grew smaller around her, and she seemed to be revolving on a noisy, creaking pivot through the smoky air. "My dear," she told her sister in a high, mincing shout, "most of these fellows will cheat you every time. All they think of is money. I had a woman up here last week to look at my feet, and when she gave me the bill, you'd have thought that she had my appendicitis out." What was the name of... So she's saying that, oh, people take advantage of me and try to charge me a lot of money. I had a woman doing something to my feet here last week, and when she charged me, you would think that she gave me an operation, like from a doctor or a surgeon. Miriam says face blue smiling. Oh, was that an emoji? I guess that's an emoji. I guess that was face blue smiling. I thought you wrote that, but I think you put an emoji. But here, the way I'm reading it, it just says face blue smiling. Okay, never mind. "What was the name of the woman?" asked Mrs. McKee. "Mrs. Eberhardt. She goes around looking at people's feet in their own homes." "I like your dress," remarked Mrs. McKee. "I think it's adorable." Mrs. Wilson rejected the compliment by raising her eyebrow with disdain. Oh, she's really acting very unpleasant. "It's just a crazy old thing," she said. "I just slip it on sometimes when I don't care what I look like." "But it looks wonderful on you." "If you know what I mean," pursued Mrs. McKee. "If Chester could only get you in that pose, I think he could make something of it." We all looked in silence at Mrs. Wilson, who removed a strand of hair. Strand of hair is like one little hair. So you can't count here. You can't say 1 hair, 2 hairs, 3 hairs. You have to use the word strand. 1 strand of hair, 2 strands of hair, 3 strands of hair. So a strand of hair is just 1 piece of hair. You can also use that for string. 1 strand of string. A strand is something long and skinny. So sometimes you see that on a map. Places near the ocean, sometimes there's a little piece of land that goes out and it's very long and skinny, and that's always called a strand, because that's what a strand is. Something long and skinny. My camera keeps going out of focus. Let me fix my camera. Okay, here we go. We all looked in silence at Mrs. Wilson, who removed a strand of hair from her eyes and looked back at us with a brilliant smile. Mr. McKee regarded her intently with his head on one side and moved his hand back and forth slowly in front of his face, because he's a photographer, so he's imagining trying to get just the right picture of her. This is a ridiculous scene, in my opinion. Miriam says a lock of hair. No, a lock of hair is different. Okay, a strand of hair is 1 piece, just 1 hair, 1 strand of hair. You can't even see this. I think I've got 2 or 3 strands of hair. You can't even see it. A lock of hair is a group of hair. This is a lock of hair. So that's the difference. This is a strand, 1, and this is a lock, a lot of hair together. "I should change the light," he said after a moment. "I'd like to bring out the modeling of the features, and I'd try to get hold of the back hair." "I wouldn't think of changing the light," cried Mrs. McKee. "I think it's..." Her husband said, "Shh." And we all looked at the subject, whereupon Tom Buchanan yawned audibly and got to his feet. "You McKees have something to drink," he said. "Get some more ice and mineral water, Myrtle, before everybody goes to sleep." I told that boy about the ice. Myrtle raised her eyebrows in despair at the shiftless of the lower orders. "These people, you have to keep after them all the time." She looked at me and laughed pointlessly, and then she flounced over to the dog, kissed it with ecstasy, and swept it into the kitchen, implying that a dozen chefs awaited her orders there. "I've done some nice things out on Long Island," asserted Mr. McKee. Tom looked at him blankly. "Two of them we found framed downstairs." "To what?" demanded Tom. "To studies. One of them I call Montauk Point, the gulls, and the other I call Montauk Point, the sea." The sister, Catherine, sat down beside me on the couch. "Do you live on Long Island too?" she inquired. "I live in West Egg." "Really? I was down there at a party about a month ago at a man named Gatsby's. Do you know him?" "I live next door to him." "Well, they say he's a nephew or a cousin of Kaiser Wilhelm. That's where all his money comes from." "Really?" She nodded. "I'm scared of him. I'd hate to have him get anything on me." This absorbing information about my neighbor was interrupted by Mrs. McKee's pointing suddenly at Catherine. "Chester, I think you could do something with her," she broke out, but Mrs. McKee only nodded in a bored way and turned his attention to Tom. "I'd like to do more work on Long Island if I could get the entry. All I ask is that they should give me a start." "Ask Myrtle," said Tom, breaking into a short shout of laughter as Mrs. Wilson entered with a tray. "She'll give you a letter of introduction, won't you, Myrtle?" So Mr. McKee, who's a photographer, is hoping that Tom, who's a very, very rich, wealthy man, could maybe connect him with some of his wealthy friends to do photography, portraits, and things like that, taking pictures of people. And he says, ask Myrtle. She'll give you the letter of introduction. Of course, her letter of introduction is worthless. Nobody cares if she recommends him. She's a poor married woman having an affair with this rich man. "Do what?" she asked, startled. "You'll give McKee a letter of introduction to your husband, so he can do some studies of him." Her husband's a mechanic. That's not what this man wanted. His lips moved silently for a moment as he invented George B. Wilson at the gasoline pump, or something like that. Catherine leaned close. That's not very nice. This man is making fun of this poor photographer. It's not nice. Tom is not a nice man. Catherine leaned close to me and whispered in my ear, "Neither of them can stand the person they're married to, can they?" "Can't stand them?" She looked at Myrtle and then at Tom. "What I say is, why go on living with them if they can't stand them? If I was them, I'd get a divorce and get married to each other right away." "Doesn't she like Wilson either?" The answer to this was unexpected. It came from Myrtle, who had overheard the question, and it was violent and obscene. "You see," cried Catherine triumphantly. She lowered her voice again. "It's really his wife that keeps them apart. She's a Catholic, and they don't believe in divorce." Daisy was not a Catholic, and I was a little shocked at the elaborateness of Let me try that again. Daisy was not a Catholic, and I was a little shocked at the elaborateness of the lie. Elaborate is another way of saying complicated. So this was a very complicated lie, unnecessarily complicated. Nobody probably really cares. When they do get married, continued Catherine, they're going west to live for a while until it blows over. When something blows over, that means that it calms down. So if there's a scandal, if you do something and everybody around you is angry, if you give it time, it will blow over. It will eventually calm down and maybe even go away. People will forget about it. So it would be a big scandal if Tom got a divorce and Myrtle got a divorce and then they married each other, especially in this small town. And especially because of the difference. Tom is a very rich man and Myrtle is maybe middle class, but probably not. Probably lower than that. It would be a very big scandal in this small town. And it would take a long time for people to forget what happened. It would take a long time for it to blow over. It'd be more discreet to go to Europe. Oh, do you like Europe? She exclaimed surprisingly. I just got back from Monte Carlo. Really? Just last year. I went over there with another girl. Stay long? No, we just went to Monte Carlo and back. We went by way of Marseille. We had over $1,200 when we started, but we got gypped. To be gypped means to be cheated. Someone stole their money by cheating them. But we got gypped out of it all in 2 days in the private rooms. Monte Carlo, maybe even now, is very famous for its casinos and gambling. So what she means by we got gypped out of it in the private rooms means they went to these casinos and they lost all of their money. And $1,200, I mean, that could be close to $120,000 in today's money, maybe more. Wait, I think I checked it's a lot of money. Let's see. Oh, okay. It's maybe about 1,200. Yeah, it's about $150,000 that they took with them, but they lost it all in the casinos. But we got gypped out of it all so they lost $150,000 in 2 days in the private rooms in the casinos. We had an awful time getting back, I can tell you. God, how I hated that town. The late afternoon sky bloomed in the window for a moment, like the blue honey of the Mediterranean. And then the shrill voice, remember shrill, that's like nails on a chalkboard, the shrill voice of Mrs. McKee called me back into the room. I almost made a mistake too, she declared vigorously. I almost married a little kike who'd been after me for years. Okay, that's an offensive word for Jewish people. So you shouldn't say that word. And that's just... So she almost married a Jewish man, but that's a very offensive word to call Jewish people. I knew he was below me. Everybody kept saying to me, Lucille, that man's way below you. But if I hadn't met Chester, he'd have got me sure. Miriam says it's written tyke in the book. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Miriam. Tyke means little child. Tyke. Tyke. So if you call someone a little tyke, that's like a little cute child. Probably a boy. I don't think you would call a girl a tyke. But spelled with a K, so that wouldn't make sense if she said, I married a little tyke. That would be like, I almost married a little boy, like a little 5-year-old boy. So maybe they changed, because they do a lot of that these days. They get offended by words that they used in the past, and they change the words so that they're not offensive anymore. So maybe they did that, but I'm sure that what she meant is, I almost married a Jewish man, but she's using this offensive term. Because it doesn't make sense to say, I almost married a little tyke. A little tyke is a little boy. Like, let's see. If I type tyke, what kind of pictures do I get if I type tyke? I would imagine like a 5-year-old boy. As with everything, it's so annoying how everything has turned into the name of a product. So it's impossible to see a picture of anything anymore. But so as you can see, this is the name of a little puppy dog cartoon character. His name is Tyke, because that sounds like cute little boy. But like very young, not like boy like even 10, but even younger, like baby boy. Yeah, they don't even show anything else. They just show pictures of these baby animals. So you have Little Tyke, Creative Child Care. So it's even the name of like a child care center. So if you've seen the book before, or if you've read it and you remember reading that word, it's possible that because it's a very offensive word, it's possible that they decided to change it just to not be offensive. But let's see, maybe it will become more clear as we read. I knew he was below me. Everybody kept saying to me, Lucille, that man is way below you. But if I hadn't met Chester, he'd have got me for sure. Oh, you're looking at the same book? Well, here, look. You see? See the word? It's with a K, not a T. Can you see? I can't believe I don't want to highlight this too much. I'll get in trouble because it's not a nice word. So I'm just going... But you can see it's with a K and not a T. I thought you were saying that you had read it before and you remember it being with a T. Yes, but listen, said Myrtle Wilson, nodding her head up and down. At least you didn't marry him. I know I didn't. Well, I married him, said Myrtle ambiguously. Well, I married him, said Myrtle ambiguously, and that's the difference between your case and mine. Why did you, Myrtle? Demanded Catherine. Nobody forced you to. Myrtle considered. I married him because I thought he was a gentleman, she said finally. I thought he knew something about breeding, but he wasn't fit to lick my shoe. So she has a very low opinion of her husband. So she thought he was nice when she married him, but now she thinks she's too good for him. That's what it means if you say that somebody isn't fit to lick your shoe. That means they don't even deserve to lick your shoes. So you feel like you're much better than them, and they're very low. You were crazy about him for a while, said Catherine. Crazy about him, cried Myrtle incredulously. Incredulously means, I can't believe it. Crazy about him? What are you talking about? Who said I was crazy about him? I never was any more crazy about him than I was about that man there. She pointed suddenly at me, and everyone looked at me accusingly. I tried to show my expression that I had played no part in her past. The only crazy I was when I married him. I knew right away I made a big mistake. He borrowed somebody's best suit to get married in, and never even told me about it. And the man came after it one day when he was out. She looked around to see who was listening. Oh, is that your suit? I said. This is the first time I've ever heard about it. But I gave it to him, and then I lay down and cried, and beat the band all afternoon. I cried to beat the band all afternoon. I don't know what that expression means, to beat the band. I guess maybe that's like an old 1920s expression. She really ought to get away from him, resumed Catherine to me. They've been living over the garage for 11 years, and Tom's the first sweetie she ever had. The bottle of whiskey, a second one, was now in constant demand by all present, excepting Catherine, who felt just as good on nothing at all. Tom rang for the janitor and sent him for some celebrated sandwiches, which were a complete supper in themselves. So when he says celebrated sandwiches, maybe that means in the neighborhood where they live, there must be a little restaurant or place that makes very delicious sandwiches that everybody loves. So he gave the janitor, the person in the apartment building who cleans the building, some money to go get some of these sandwiches for everyone. I wanted to get out and walk eastward toward the park through the soft twilight, but each time I tried to go, I became entangled in some wild, strident argument which pulled me back, as if with ropes into my chair. Yet high over the city, our line of yellow windows must have contributed their share of human secrecy to the casual watcher in the darkening streets. I was him too, looking up and wondering. I was within and without, simultaneously enchanted and repelled by the inexhaustible variety of life. Myrtle pulled her chair close to mine, and suddenly warm breath poured over me, the story of her first meeting with Tom. It was on two little seats facing each other that are always the last ones left on the train. I was going up to New York to see my sister and spend the night. He had on a dress suit and patent leather shoes, and I couldn't keep my eyes off him, but every time he looked at me, I had to pretend to be looking at the advertisement over his head. When he came into the station, he was next to me in his white shirt, and his white shirt front pressed against my arm. And so I told him I'd have to call a policeman, but he knew I lied. I was so excited that when I got into a taxi with him, I didn't hardly know I wasn't getting into a subway train. All I kept thinking about over and over was, "You can't live forever. You can't live forever." She turned to Mrs. McKee, and the room rang full of her artificial laughter. "My dear," she cried, "I'm going to give you this dress as soon as I'm through with it. I'm going to get another one tomorrow. I'm going to make a list of all the things I've got to get. A massage and a wave and a collar for the dog, and one of those cute little ashtrays where you touch the spring, and a wreath with black silk bow for Mother's grave. And a wreath with a black silk bow for Mother's grave that'll last all summer. I've got to write down a list so I won't forget all the things I've got to do." It was 9 o'clock. Almost immediately afterwards, I looked at my watch and found it was 10. Mr. McKee was asleep on a chair with his fists clenched. This is how you clench your fists, like this, in his lap. Like a photograph of a man of action. Taking out my handkerchief, I wiped his cheek, the remains of a spot of dried lather, and that had worried me all afternoon. The little dog was sitting on the table, looking with blind eyes through the smoke, and from time to time groaning faintly. People disappeared, reappeared, made plans to go somewhere, and then lost each other, searched for each other, found each other a few feet away. Sometime toward midnight, Tom Buchanan and Mrs. Wilson stood face to face, discussing in impassioned voices whether Mrs. Wilson had any right to mention Daisy's name. "Daisy, Daisy, Daisy," shouted Mrs. Wilson. "I'll say it whenever I want to. Daisy." Making a short, deft movement, Tom Buchanan broke her nose with his open hand. So that's his wife. And she's the mistress, and she says, "I don't care about her. I'll say her name, Daisy." So Tom broke her nose for saying her name and disrespecting her. There were bloody towels upon the bathroom floor, and women's voices scolding, and high over the confusion a long broken wail of pain. Mr. McKee awoke from his doze. Dozing is like sleeping. And started in a daze toward the door. When he had gone halfway, he turned around and stared at the scene. His wife and Catherine scolding and consoling. Scolding is like, you did the wrong thing, you did a bad thing. So they must have been yelling at, oh God, I forgot his name. What is his name? Tom Buchanan, because he broke her nose for saying Daisy. So the other women are saying, what did you do? Why did you do that? You shouldn't do that. And consoling means, oh, poor girl. So they were doing two things at once. Oh, what did he do to you? You idiot, why did you do that? So scolding and consoling. As they stumbled here and there among the crowded furniture with the articles of aid and the despairing figure on the couch, bleeding fluently and trying to spread a copy of Town Tattle over the tapestry scenes of Versailles. Then Mr. McKee turned and continued out the door, taking my hat. From the chandelier, I followed. Come to lunch someday, he suggested as we groaned down the elevator. Where? Anywhere. Keep your hands off the levers, snapped the elevator boy. I beg your pardon, said Mr. McKee with dignity. I didn't know I was touching it. All right, I agreed. I'll be glad to. I was standing beside his bed as he was sitting up between the sheets, clad in his underwear, with a great portfolio in his hands. Beauty and the Beast, Loneliness, Old Grocery Horse, Brook and Bridge. Then I was lying half asleep in the cold lower level of Pennsylvania Station, staring at the Morning Tribune and waiting for the 4 o'clock train. All right, well, that was Chapter 2 of The Great Gatsby. So next time we will read Chapter 3. Let me just see what does that mean, next time? I just want to check my schedule. I think that would be Thursday. Probably Thursday. Yeah. Okay. So the next time I will be able to read this at the same time will be Thursday morning. Well, morning for me. I don't know about for you. But same time, Thursday, we will read Chapter 3. So thank you, everyone who stayed and watched until the end. Thank you for your questions and your comments. And I will see you on Thursday with Chapter 3 of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald.